Welcome to another episode of Readers and Writers. The goal of these shows is to help you get published, or if you are not a writer, to give you insights into how difficult and intricate the process of becoming a famous author truly is. Hundreds of thousands of people write books and make no money. Even if you get an advance of $5,000, you are likely to make less than $7 an hour after you've finished all the work. However, there are other rewards beside money. In our first show, we interviewed Nancy Brown. She was happy to break even. She solicited funds from family members to publish her book on her revered great-grandmother. She memorialized a piece of her family history in that book. In our second show, Marla Stone wrote The Clutter Remedy in response to her clients needing help with clutter. She also utilized her book to promote herself as a realtor and to promote herself as a personal coach. She demonstrated that having excellent websites are an important element to promoting herself and her book. As a result of her book, she sees increased referrals for her consulting and real estate businesses in addition to book sales. Today, my guest is Linda DeVillers. She is a clinical psychologist, university professor with advanced training in human sexuality. She has written 2 books on the topic of human sexuality, which we are here to discuss today. Should I call you doctor or professor?
I like doctor. Thank you.
Well then, doctor. I realize early on that you're very savvy with your methodical approach to publishing. And I wanted the audience to know a lot more about that. So what prompted you to write your first book?
My first book emanated from a frustration in my own clinical practice because it's really important to give between session assignments, particularly for people who have sexual issues. And I was having to say, well, this book over here is good for that, but this one over there is good for this other. And I wanted a one-stop shopping, as it were, to create one book that would have the kinds of exercises that I knew were really important. And this was coupled with the fact that I was eligible for a sabbatical. So I said, as you know, for a sabbatical, you have to have a project. Mm-hmm. And I indeed applied for the sabbatical, and it was accepted.
Oh.
So now I had to actually write something. Mm-hmm. And even for the sabbatical, by the way, I had to articulate that I did have a title in mind. It was Love Skills, because that happened to be the title of a video that I was familiar with. And somehow I'm tooling down the freeway, and love skills, talk skills, play skills. And I got into this monosyllable mind, and I just said, this will cover the bases. Mm-hmm. So the next problem was, now I'm on the sabbatical, and I confess for about 2 months, I think I cruised and, and then it's like, reality, you have to do something. So I knew enough to start researching, but early on I contacted somebody who had written a book herself, who was rather well known in the field and lived in Long Beach. I was in the West Los Angeles area. So I called her and I said, did you have any help writing your book? And she said, are you kidding? Mm-hmm. I would never have accomplished this without the assistance of, and she gave me the name of this person. I'll add as an aside, by the way, she said, by the way, I hope it doesn't bother you if she is a trans person, because this is back in the early 90s.
They are a trans person?
And I met this person in horrible rain who's wearing her mini skirt and heels, but we got along famously from the get-go. She had huge background in editing, but also in the creation of something called a book prospectus, this is step one if you're looking for, a, what do we call it, small press or even large press, legitimate publishing house.
Well, before you go on, is there a difference between a prospectus and a query letter? I mean, is it nonfiction and fiction?
As far as I know, my recollection is there's a definite difference. The query letter is more of a shorthand publicity thing. I have this idea for a book, and it would cover this, and there aren't a lot of details in it. The prospectus is quite detailed. And the person I hired, another term for her, which I know is used today in the field, is called a book shepherd. And a book shepherd is somebody who literally takes you by the hand and walks you through the various stages. Did you want to know more about a book prospectus, I suspect?
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but...
So in a book prospectus, there are various parts. And for starters, you need to write a chapter. You need to have an outline of what the book is. And very, very key is you need to do a synopsis of the competitors in the field and do a very thorough, research background on who's written what. And then obviously you're going to have to say, and despite all these other books, what my book does that nobody else has done yet is something.
So it sounds kind of like a business plan. But for a book.
It probably is. And then you also, or you say, my slant is different. Or you now also have to say, who is your target audience? Now, I have known some naive people who make statements like, anybody who likes to read. Or anybody with a particular problem, and you need to be definitely more chiseled in what you say is your target audience.
Very much so.
Very much so. And you also have to, what am I leaving out? You have to have your own bio, and you also have to make clear, why is anybody going to buy your book? Who are you anyway?
Yes.
And in my own case, for example, I had done research in the 1980s that got national attention.
And what was that?
It was on the sexual benefits of aerobic exercise for women.
Yay!
And through a contact I had, a psychiatrist, Shape Magazine was willing to, they wanted a questionnaire. They wanted a survey on women and body image. And I said I wanted women body image and the role of exercise, because that was my personal interest. We landed up with data and numbers. And what you find out about the popular press is they love numbers.
Yes.
No numbers, no dice. But I had numbers and I had national data because it landed up.
That's phenomenal. I mean, to have national data.
And I presented my paper at a professional conference. Somebody from USA Today read the prospectus of the Society for the Scientific Study of Sexuality, their annual convention, and this woman called me and said, I was looking over the program, and the truth is it looked kind of boring, but your paper, which was called something about women's sexuality, body image, and aerobic exercise, but I gave her numbers. The next day, the day before I actually presented my paper, USA Today published an article called Working Out Builds Sex Drive. And that shows you the power of words and phrasing and marketing.
Yes, and that's such a good point.
And from that moment on, I used to say the phone didn't stop ringing for a decade. So I landed up in all sorts of magazines, being quoted, and that was important for the prospectus.
Yes.
I think I had also been interviewed on a few television shows as well. In fact, I'm quite sure I had been. So you have to show that people might be interested in you or that a publisher is going to be able to give you visibility.
Yes.
The more you can do that, the better.
And that's why I described you as savvy, because so many people go into this very naive and think, well, I like the book, it was fun writing it, and I think...
So, and then I know another question, maybe related to this whole idea of a prospectus is, although I'm jumping the gun possibly, but it has to do with the contract.
Yes, in
Now,
fact, I was going to ask you about
so
that.
my wonderful person, my trans
Oh,
person.
you're,
oh, yes.
was that the shepherd? Is that?
Well, she didn't use that term, but that's
Okay.
what you could call her, you know. And so it got sent out to a variety of prospective publishers, and this is where you have to cherry pick. In the field of psychology, there are various theoretical perspectives. There are big houses. I had 2 or 3 that were of the same theoretical perspective that I was coming from, that I knew were the appropriate pieces.
Yes.
You know, and the genre was quote unquote self-help. And sure enough, we got the bite, and the contract came, and my good person took pen and pencil and went through that contract.
Yes.
That is really, really important.
Yes, absolutely.
And things that I've heard horror stories about that have to do with who owns the copyright in perpetuity.
Yes.
Mine was not like that. It was a 2-year with a 5-year on foreign rights.
I was wondering about that because I know that at some point you started to self-publish.
Bingo.
Yes, and that had to be in your contract to allow you to do that.
Absolutely. And what's also something that many people may not realize is that once the publisher has the document, normally they do have an in-house editor. I liked my person. I chose to pay her instead of using their in-house. But they still had final authority over what goes into the book and what doesn't. And I had a final section in the book. The publisher proceeds to say, you know, your book is so well done. We like what you've done so much, but we just think these couple of items are a little over the top, and we're dumping them.
Ooh.
And you don't have any power.
Can I ask you what they were?
Yes. Speaking of sex, and frankly, my book is tame, particularly compared to others. And I continue to be on the faculty of Pepperdine, which is not a wide place. I had a section on trios, and I had said under that, threesomes, if you like, that maybe you'd like to have a fantasy about that, or read fantasy, because I did not highly encourage, yeah, you ought to give that a try sometime. I did not do that. Interestingly, 2 others. The other was anal sex, and I can't say, I mean, the book was more heterosexually focused. It has no heterosexual language in it, however. It takes a lot of curves to write in non-heterosexist mode.
But thank you for that.
I did it from the very first writing. What was it, Darren? That was it? BDSM. At the time, it was just called Bondage and Discipline. And again, I was pretty tame. Maybe you'd like to try a wrist cuff, maybe this might be that. But those are the 3 items he dumped. Now, those were exactly the areas that my undergraduate students expressed a lot of interest in. The minute the rights reverted to me, guess what went back in the book?
I saw, yes.
Okay. Well, you wouldn't know that it wasn't in there from the beginning.
Exactly. Now let me ask you,
Yes.
so the cover design, so we've got the cover design of both these books.
I paid for that.
Okay, so it wasn't from the original
No way.
publisher.
The size is larger. No, and some people considered it very much in, I don't remember, Friends. The program Friends was on in the 90s. Oh, if you saw the cover, it would be so ancient and weird. The minute the rights reverted to me, it wasn't this nice. It was not this nice, but I had a new cover. When I wrote book number 2, and we were saying, let's make a compendium, and I had a graduate assistant who had an artist friend I am so pleased with this current cover. This is only the cover for the 6th edition.
Oh, this is beautiful. I mean, I'm going to hold it up.
Creative.
It's very sensual. It's very sensual, but not, it's tasteful.
Oh, absolutely.
Tastefully sensual. And speaking of tasty.
Let's talk about another book.
Yeah, we've got Simple, Sexy Food. And this book has kind of a different story behind it.
Yeah, well, it came in a different period of my life. I'm still working part-time, both academically and with clients, but it came at a time when I was looking to probably stop teaching full-time, because I was really teaching more than full-time. And it was because of a friend who said, but Linda, you love to cook and you da-da-da-da-da. You should write a sexy cookbook. I'm going, really? But it was just sort of you're right. I'm really interested in nutrition. I'm really interested in healthy eating. But that can sound very sober. Mm-hmm. And I knew enough to know that virtually all aphrodisiac foods, as a matter of fact, are healthy. Ah. And why not put a sexy spin on these things and learn more about them and coupled it with recipes. So the book, sometimes I consider this book 2 books in one. Mm-hmm. The first half covers a full 88 aphrodisiac foods, both their lore and their what I call sexy nutrients. And it's all from peer-reviewed or academic press literature.
And that is so important because so many people don't value the research.
Well, or they Google, let's Google, and this is not going to work.
Yeah.
I had amazing references, by the way, which I included.
I noticed.
I didn't include all because 1 or 2 was too favorite for me. But, you find books called Eating Right in the Renaissance. Mm-hmm. I mean, what is this book about? Mm. But so the lore of many foods was totally unknown to me. Mm-hmm. And then it was sort of an easier project to get the nutrients and get peer-reviewed material on that. The second half actually includes recipes.
Yes. Now, are those your recipes or adapted recipes?
I can tell you something fascinating that I learned also. So many of them are recipes that I personally tweaked. There's 1 or 2 that's sort of a family heirloom. Mm-hmm. There are some that are contemporary. And there are some, I don't want to say most, but 1 or 2 that the recipe is the recipe that I didn't originate. Mm-hmm. So you can bet I was on the phone with a copyright attorney in Century City. Oh, yes. And I called and said, look, I need to know because the Los Angeles Times, in that era, I'm sad it's over, had a whole food section. Mm. And they used to put adapted from, adapted from. So I'm calling the attorney and saying, so tell me something. What's the scoop about a recipe? I learned point blank, recipes are not copyrightable. Oh. However, words are. So, okay, now we get into something very interesting here.
And let me, before you go on, I want to highlight that sometimes people just think that they can take written material and add it to their product. And that is so illegal. Oh, so what you are talking about is...
No. So here's the fancy stuff. And if I could dare just maybe show one page. Let me see if I can get a really fun one. Oh, this will be great. So that's what he says. And then he says, on the other hand, there's only so many ways to say, turn on the oven. But what happened is partly because they are coming from various sources, there's a consistent pattern to how these recipes are presented. Mm. Sometimes if you look at recipes, they're 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes, there's all different format. Mm-hmm. So the part that is original words is the step-by-step. The fact that it is formatted, I don't know if people can see this or not, but what I'd like you to notice is that there are some drawings and that there are some sidebars. That's absolutely original.
Yes, yes.
Not only that, at the top of each recipe, it says sexy foods. That is totally original. So you see, this is not, I mean, you could argue now that this is copyrightable. Nobody's ever done that.
Yes.
And that this makes original formatting.
Yes, makes sense.
And
Yes.
so that's how that worked.
So a question then, if I understand correctly, this book, Love Skills, is profitable. This book
Is not.
is not.
Because this is a 9-hour photo shoot.
Wow.
With a food stylist, with 2 actors, with a director, with a, yeah. It was sort of a project of love, and it was intriguing. And the truth is, I was in a position to pay for this stuff to be done, although ultimately, it was more than I expected. And unfortunately, for all that I know theoretically about marketing, there was some bad timing. The books arrived to me a week or 2 after Valentine's Day, when they were supposed, because it was printed overseas, and that was probably a big mistake. And I certainly believe in websites. I know you were mentioning earlier that websites are really important. I agree. But I didn't at that point put a massive amount of attention. There was a certain amount of PR that was done. And then it is what it is.
Yes.
And at this point, if it's a friend, you're welcome to have a book. This one, to this day, once those rights reverted to me, and by the way, it was a 5,000 print run.
Oh, that's what I wanted to ask, yes.
I don't honestly remember how, I think, all I remember is that 750 books were remaindered and sold to something called Rodale Press, which was one of the big, they may be to this day. I called the publisher saying, I'd like to buy more of my books at discount, because that's how it worked. Oh, we don't have any anymore. They're off with the remainder. I called that remainder person so fast and bought the whole lot.
Excellent.
And then, because I did make a profit, with those remaindered copies that only cost me $1 or $2, they were promptly in the college and university bookstores.
And that was brilliant. Brilliant.
I dare to say in the undergrad class it was required reading as an adjunct. It certainly wasn't the primary textbook.
Yes. And
yes, to this day, and literally to last week in my 2 classes, I read book reviews of my own book. I've probably read thousands at this point. And I'm thrilled to say that people really benefit from it.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
So
it's well written.
I'm pleased with that.
Yeah, it's well laid out. You have, I love what's in the back of your book. I'm one of these book nerds.
Oh, the anxious moments?
Yes, but also just your
fact that I have
glossary
other
of terms and resources for lovers.
Right.
And then
a lot of alternatives.
Yes, a lot of alternatives for people. And your index.
Yeah.
I mean, which is sometimes a nonfiction book doesn't have an index.
I think you're right. That's really a terrible plan.
It is a terrible plan.
That's a terrible plan.
Yeah, it's a terrible plan. So I have just a few questions. I won't ask you a lot of questions here, but what would you say is the most common problem that people come to you for?
Oh, that's a great question.
I thought you'd like it.
And curious, or maybe it's not surprising, the issue of sexual desire is huge. And typically, it can be over the top too much or not enough, but the burning issue of the day is low sex desire, and or what better correctly described should be a mismatch It's not low drive, but it has to do with one person is more interested than the other.
Yes.
And the other classic dilemma with that is that the higher drive person is saying, hey, you got a problem.
Yes.
And if this is a person in a relationship, we have to say, I'm always saying, even if one person comes, if they're partnered, we really need to chat together. And we need to start talking about what the imbalance is all about.
Yes.
And then I think another key problem, and it is related to this first one, is that people are probably more obsessed with sexual frequency than quality. And of course,
Yes.
I literally was with a client just yesterday where it's like quality counts, and it's so exciting to work with people who come in and say, I remember somebody last summer, if I never have sex again in my life, that will not bother me. And within a month, because we chatted about, let's talk about some of the prerequisites to making this a more enjoyable experience for you. And this was a couple that were, she was in her 60s. And he was like in her early 50s. She was also older, worked out. Now, it's not always that simple, but I think those are key problems. And it also turns out that it's sad but true. The whole issue of female orgasm remains an issue. Sex education in the United States is horrific, and it is politically driven.
Thank you for saying that tactfully.
And, I've been in this field for decades, and it is a shocker.
Yes.
Europe does a much better job than we do.
Yes.
And along with that orgasm issue is the word of the day is PIV sex. So I bet you don't know that.
No, I don't know what that is.
But in the last 5 years or so at conferences, penis and vagina, which you notice it's totally heterosexual, but it is about, this is what sex means.
Oh my.
And so this is whether people are young or old, not just for older people, but it maybe becomes more pronounced
for older people. Yes.
That there's other versions of sex besides PIV sex.
Yes. Well, this is all very, very exciting, and I'm so grateful to have you on the program.
Thank you.
So Dr. DeVillis has allowed us to understand how important it is to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves, how important it is to have the time to do the research, how to consider the niche of the subject and the market viability, including the audience. It's important to find a path that has the highest probability of success, find a topic of interest, and a publisher who specializes in a timely manner. Sometimes topics are no longer in fashion, and also hire important people who have good abilities in order to help the publishing process. It's not a one-person show. Finally, to tie up some loose ends, the Publishing Club invites you to visit their website. It's full of important information, including about membership and upcoming events. Also, consider the Independent Book Publishers of America event in May in San Diego. Dr. Villers reminded me about that. And Dr. Villers is available to present to your organization. If you would like her, please reach out. And finally, if you have any questions or comments, are interested in being a guest on this show, please email me at readerstv6gmail.com. And you do not have to worry about capitalization when you send the email. Just remember readers and writerstv6@gmail.com. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you.
And
great fun.
Yeah, great fun.